Any interested of
Sorry.
any interested member of the public can participate telephonically or via internet by utilizing the web link or dial-in information printed on this agenda. Instructions on how to make a public comment during the meeting. At points in the meeting, when the meeting chair requests public comment, members of the public participating in the live meeting, either via internet or telephone, shall indicate their desire to speak. If participating via internet, please click the raise hand feature located within the Zoom application screen. If connected via telephone, please dial *9. At this time, I'd like to invite our board secretary to do a roll call of the directors.
Board President Ruggieri.
Here.
Director Case.
Here.
Director Kilkenny.
Here.
Director Oysterman.
Here.
Director Shea.
Here.
Thanks.
Thank you. And then moving on to the agenda, are there any changes requested as far as the agenda is concerned?
My only question was if the financial stuff is going to take a while, do we want to consider moving Chief White before that, just so that he actually has some life and family time tonight?
The only thing I would suggest, and Chief White, I'm not deprioritizing you, is the auditor, a gentleman named Hep Pham, is also going to join the meeting, so he's waiting for that as well.
So do we flip a coin who goes first? Just kidding.
I think the auditor will take precedent over me every time. But thank you for the consideration. I appreciate that.
Thank you. So then let's consider the agenda as adopted. And then moving on to the consent calendar. Do I hear a motion to approve?
I move to approve the consent calendar as presented.
I'll second that.
Great. Any comments from the board? Right. Any comments from the public?
Yeah, 1 second, please. Oh, hold on. Jump the gun on me there. Okay. Stephen.
Hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, actually, I didn't have a chance to speak to the agenda, which I do believe I have a public comment for that. I think tonight's agenda is way too packed with too much important stuff to do this in one meeting. This is going to be a very full meeting. There's a lot to discuss and it requires some good attention. And there's at least 3 items that have taken a lot of time in past meetings. And I just think to give these matters careful consideration, you might want to take some of this off the agenda. For example, we're going to be talking about the trail at the Park and Rec Commission. I think we spoke, the Park and Rec Commission spoke about that for about an hour and 15 minutes or hour and a half. So, and then of course, everything else is quite important. Now I'd like to move on actually to the consent calendar. There's some bills there, some big bills concerning the park maintenance shed. I noticed we're paying for some big bills and we don't really have too much information other than the name of who got paid. We don't know what work was completed or what period it's for. I'm thinking the bill for $147,000 to the builder. And of course, Bill Hansel, actually that was indicated was for architectural services, but we don't know if this is complete. There was a lot of money spent this month, and I think it really shouldn't just be knocked down without some discussion on some of these issues. Can we have some illustration of what is occurring in the consent calendar there? Eric?
I'm waiting for you to finish your comment, Stephen.
Well, I'm, you know, that's my comment. There's a lot of expenditures concerning the maintenance shed, and we really don't know how much is. I don't know by a quick glance how much is being spent on the maintenance shed, and quite frankly, it's, you know, there's a lot of money that we are spending on this. And so we deserve a little bit more of a report than just, you know, a line on the, a line on your report.
Thank you, Stephen. Is there a question that you were going to address, Eric?
Well, I can tell you, I mean, as far as the billing goes for the contractor for the maintenance building, all of these are done by progress. They're submitted and detailed, and then they're reviewed before they're approved based on progress completion to date. And then there's always a 5% retainer held with each billing as well.
So Eric, do you consider it moving along? I mean, I know we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but just to address the billing that's happened, do you consider these all to be part of the normal process? Nothing is sticking out to you?
100%.
Okay. Can I just ask, sorry, I was a little slow on opening my packet. I'm looking at 50, is it 60? My eyes are going 6047, which is the one to Hansel design, which I think Stephen may be referencing, at least in part. And I was just curious, and you may not be able to pull this up, but I was just curious how much we paid Bill to date.
I don't have that in front of me, Chris. I'd have
Yeah,
to,
I wouldn't
I'd have
expect
to
you
look
to,
at that.
but maybe that could be just trying to understand how much we're paying to the contractor versus, you know,
Sure.
how much we're
Yeah,
on-
that's fine.
ongoing
And I
payment.
gave a pretty detailed update on all of this at the last meeting as well. So the architect billing was included in that for construction, and then the contractor, I would add this billing to that as well. But I can update you for the next meeting. It's not a
Okay,
problem.
that would be great. My other one is 6065, which was the defensible space inspections. And are we reimbursed for that through the MWPA?
Yeah, the funding comes through MWPA. It's not so much of a reimbursement as in we get certain allocated pot of money. One is for defensible space and one is for local projects, otherwise known as our vegetation management projects. So this is all part of the spending plan, and it is all money that comes from MWPA. That's why it's classified, because we track all those revenues
Gotcha.
and expenditures separately.
Okay, cool. And then my last question was 6100 to land design.
Yes.
And this may be a bigger answer too that you can't do off the top of your head. I was just curious how many hours, like what does that represent? Like I'm don't know a lot about that contract.
Sure.
And maybe that's something I know Luke has. I think there was something somewhere where Luke, you said you might be diving into that a little bit more. Maybe I'm wrong.
Sorry, Chris, I didn't understand the last part of your question. I'm happy to speak to
I'm
it.
looking at 6100, which is just like the monthly to land design.
Yes.
And I was just curious if, like, I don't know anything about that contract that we have with them. Is that like for a certain number of hours, a certain number of days, a certain number of people? And again, if that's too much to answer off the top of your head, I totally understand. Those were just the ones that jumped out at me.
Should we
Yeah, no.
address it when we talk about with the daily and weekly stuff? Because isn't that what the,
We can.
I mean, I can give you a brief answer to that. The land design contract is based upon a level of maintenance. So it's sort of has resulted in the crew basically, for the most part, comes out once a week for a full day. The size of the crew varies depending on the workload, depending on, the height of the weeds and what sort of things are going on that season. But they're typically here once a week for most of the year. Sometimes they'll come twice a week. Sometimes the crew size will vary. And it's based on the different areas that are in the contract and the level of maintenance needs for those areas.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, can I add on to that too? I mean, that's the same cost we've been paying them actually since the contract was formed in 2014. And
Okay,
just to
that's
give you
great.
some reference, the contract is posted onto our website. So if you actually go onto the website, you look under district information and then contracts and RFPs, the complete contract is posted publicly there as well.
Awesome, thank you guys.
Yep.
Thank you for the additional clarification. All right, with that, can we have a vote to approve the consent calendar?
That's you, Tiff.
My internet's freezing. I didn't hear anything. We ready to vote? Sorry. Sorry. Let's do it before it freezes again. Board President Ruggieri,
Aye.
Director Case,
Aye.
Director Kilkenny,
Aye.
Director Oyserman,
Aye.
and Director Shea.
Aye.
Thanks. Sorry.
You all good. Moving on to item D, public comment. Open time for items not on the agenda.
Yeah, 1 second, please. Steven.
Yeah, I hate to start off this way, but quite frankly, the answer given to my questions, I thought were non-responsive. We're spending a lot of money and we really need accurate financial reporting, and we're not getting it. So, and it just frustrates the hell out of me that to think that our staff just is unresponsive to questions. It just it's very unreasonable. Well, let's set that aside for the moment. In 50 years, I guess that'd be what, 2072. I think most of us are going to be dead, right? And many of us will be, maybe not all of us. I'm sure some of us are going to live forever, but most of us will be forgotten, will be names not known in this community. And it's really, when you think about it, it's not that much time that will have passed. And that's why what we do tonight, what we do in the future is so important, so very important. We had such a gift here because of the people that came before us, who started this community services district, people that had foresight and vision to create the fire department, to buy the open space, to create service clubs, to create great rec programs, and we're all inheritors of that. The future doesn't end with us. It goes on. And I'd like us to think how we can make this a more beautiful and place to live. We will be having a lot of challenges in the near future. I will bring up what the housing element may do to our community a little later on, but Marinwood is going to look very different if the current plans are in place. So we want to make sure that we create the beautiful place that we know and give it on to the next generation who lives here. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Stephen. Any other public comment?
Nope, that is all.
All right. Moving on to district matters, item 1, presentation of fiscal year 2021 audited basic financial statements and management report.
Right. As I mentioned earlier, HEP Fam, who was our auditor, CPA with RJ Ricciardi Incorporated, I'm going to bring him over and he will go over highlights of the audit and be able to answer any questions the board might have. So just give me 1 second here, if you could. There it is. Good evening, HEP. How are you?
Hi, Eric. I'm doing good. How's
Good.
everyone doing?
Great,
Great.
welcome.
Okay, so I'm here to present the audit report for June 30th. Eric, am I able to do the share screen?
Yes, you
Yeah,
sure can.
Let's go. Great. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see that. So here are my notes regarding the audit report. I'll go over them really quickly. Feel free to stop me at any time if you have any questions. I'll first start with the opinions, go over the financial statement variances and trends, and then I'll be open for comments. To first start out with, the first page of the audit report is probably the most important page. This is where we give our opinion on the financial statements, and I'm pleased to state that we issued an unmodified clean opinion. So that's what that's basically stating is that the financial statements are materially accurate and in accordance with the generally accepted accounting principles. The next schedule, I'm gonna enlarge a little bit. I just want to go over some trends from the previous year to this year. As you see, cash and investments went up about $1.5 million, and that's due to the increase in net position. Capital assets went down by $136,000. That's due to additions of $34,000 and depreciation of $170,000. The green line items are all related to the net pension liability and the OPEB, which I'll go over that in a little more detail later. The unearned revenue went up by $324,000. This represents park and rec services that were deferred into the next year. And it just happened that last year, because of COVID, we just had less deferred revenues. On restricted net assets, increased by $555,000. And this represents the OPEB trust account, the Measure A restricted funds, and the MWPA restricted funds. The overall increase in that position increased by $662,000. And the net assets that are related to the net pension liability and OPEB actually increased by $511,000. So all these changes that went up and down, the net effect actually increased your net assets. The next schedule, the statement of activities. As you see, charges for services for Park and Rec actually decreased this year by $619,000 due to COVID mostly. The taxes and special assessments actually increased by $225,000, and our overall revenues went down by $267,000. Overall expenses decreased by $738,000, and that's due to reduction in staffing due to COVID and lower costs. Last year we had a prior period adjustment to record the OPEB trust account, but overall we ended in a change in net position of about $1.6 million. This next schedule shows your trends, some of your key trends. The chart probably doesn't do it justice, but if you look at the cash and investments, you can see that it's steadily increasing over the last 4 years. 4 years ago, it was about $3.9 million, now it's 6.9. Revenues have actually taken a dip. It was $6.1 million in 2018, went up a little bit in 2019, but has decreased in the last 2 years. Net assets have actually increased over the last 4 years from $7.6 million to 9.9. And here's the OPEB and NPL net assets. That actually decreased from $11.9 million to 11.2. The rest of the audit report is just required disclosures that describe the accounting policies and provides further detail to each major account. The budget to actual, the revenues were actually over budget by $674,000 and expenditures were under budget by $522,000. The auto adjustments, nothing unusual, just the closing entries that we prepare for the long-term assets and liabilities, so nothing out of the ordinary. And in conclusion, I'd like to thank Eric and Tiffany for their cooperation and assistance during the audit. We did the audit remotely this year, so I know there was a lot of scanning documents and emailing to me, so that was a great help.
Good.
Any questions?
A couple things I wanted to clarify before the questions, because it gets confusing and we've tried to explain this in the past, so bear with me. But especially when you're looking at, like park and rec or rec revenues, keeping in mind that the fiscal year that was audited was 2020, 2021. So when you look at a summer program, it's hard to, you look at it from the basis of a summer, but the program splits fiscal years, and the majority of the revenue actually occurs in the second of the 2 fiscal years, meaning from July 1st on, because we have more programming available during that time. So 2020, we were obviously very scaled back in what we were offering for summer camps, when in 2021, the beginning of the next summer, it started to pick up a little bit. So that kind of explains that drastic difference between the year prior, where this was the first impacted year of all of the COVID restrictions that we had to deal with in 2020. So that explains where that revenue dip really is coming from there.
Thanks, Eric. And thank you, Hep, for giving us that synopsis. Any questions from the board or comments?
Not everybody at once, though.
I will add thank you for Eric and Tiffany for all your hard work that you guys put into this as well.
Oh, yeah, thank you, Fam, and then also clearly Eric and Tiffany. But basically, from what I'm seeing, all of our ability to put more money away for the pension liability and paying that upfront has really helped us overall, right? In terms of the financial stability that the district has. I mean, it's still a bit of a hole, but we're slowly working our way to maybe possibly peek our head up from that.
Yeah, well, and keeping in mind too, when you're looking at things like your OPEB valuations and the liabilities, these are actually based on like a 1.5 year old data, because the valuation date goes back farther than just the first of the fiscal year. So they're always going to be a little bit dated. To answer your question, yes, we're doing much better in that regard. And you can see that it's actually starting to pull some of the liability down, which is nice. And that'll only increase with each study as we go along, I would assume.
Yeah, there was, I can't remember what page, but it had like a projection out through like 2025 or something. Is that correct on page 30? Right. Anyways, but no, thank you. It was nice to see all the numbers and see that Eric and the rest of the team being so financially savvy and not spending money when we can save it is really helping us with the pandemic and keeping us financially their head above the water. So thank you.
Yeah, well, and I think a couple other things to make sure you look at there too is, even though we had a decent growth in revenues, a good chunk of that revenue is restricted. That's why I appreciate that Hep kind of broke that out in one of those slides, because we get all of that revenue hasn't been spent, but that revenue is designated and can only be spent in very specific ways. So with that, it kind of gives your overall valuation a lot greater, but they're still very restricted funds to be spent on very specific purposes. And then the only other point I would note out is that we did note the board designated reserves as increasing by another 100,000 in accordance with the budget that was approved to earmark 100,000 to go towards the board designated reserve. So those went from 300 to 400 as of June 30th.
Perfect.
Anything from the public?
Yeah, 1 second.
I think
please.
Bill has his hand raised.
Oh, sorry, Bill. I didn't see your yellow hand there.
That's okay. I just wanted to thank everybody for working so hard. This has been an ongoing process for the last 8 to 9, 10 years of getting this district in a solvent financial position. You can see on this audit report, it's one of the cleanest I've ever seen out of this district in all the years that I've been involved here, going to meetings, and that's well before I was even a director. I'm just happy that we're in the proper direction. It's just phenomenal to be able to see this. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Anyone else? All right, now feedback from the public.
Sure,
Questions?
1 second, please. Stephen.
Yeah. Well, I want to echo what Bill said. Yeah, we're moving in the right direction, and that is a very good thing. Things were very dicey there for a few years, and they are definitely moving in the right direction. These reports tell us where we've been and indicate where we may be going. And I actually think that we don't really fully have a good handle on the financial flows of the district, because we combine our revenue activities with, I'll just throw them under the category of business activities versus monies that we come in for taxes. There seems it's very unclear where those boundaries are when you break out the expenses. And I think it's important to do this because we certainly want, they're really just two different sources of revenue and should be managed with a different view. We want our business activities to be hopefully profitable. If they're losing money, maybe we want to lose money in some activities, that's fine. But if we don't really understand where one expense, where the expenses go, we really don't know how well our businesses are doing, nor do we know how well the district is doing. I think we have a lot of potential in this district to improve it, improve the grounds, improve our capital assets, improve our open space. And I'd like to see us grow. I think we can, there are revenue opportunities that are untapped. I don't want to turn us into a private country club, but I do want us to manage our assets well, and that will serve the most people in our community. So something to think about. Break out the business revenues from the other streams, the traditional streams of revenues, and I think we'll do a better job of growing the district. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Stephen. All right, then moving on to item 2.
We're done. Before we move, I just wanted to thank Hep again. He was really good for us to work with, and he's very accommodating and answers all of our questions going in, and make sure that we're getting him the right materials, and was patient with us. And Hep, just thank you for everything. And again, it's always been a good working relationship these last 2 years, and thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, everyone. Have a good
Thanks,
night.
Hef. Appreciate it. All right, then. So now moving on to fiscal year 2021 second quarter profit and loss budget to actuals report.
Yep, I'm just, sorry, flipping through a thick packet here to get to that. So again, this is, fairly different than what you just looked at. This is simply P&L for Q1 and Q2 that goes, looks at revenues to date, expenditures to date, and compares them against budget. And then again, a little note on the top reminding that we operate on a modified accrual basis. So just because we are at the 50% part of the year as of December 31st doesn't mean that all items should be at a 50% clip. Of the things that I've put in here, just some notes. As of the end of the month, we did receive the first installment of ad valorem property taxes and special assessment. Typically, that represents 55% of total ad valorem property tax expected. We're actually trending ahead of what we have budgeted on there, so I'm expecting that to come in a little bit higher on the revenue side than budgeted. To be clear, the district received 1.23 million in net ad valorem property taxes and just over 895,000 in net special assessments thus far, as is actually stated in the report. I do have a note in here about interest. We used to perform much better in interest, and despite the fact that we actually have a higher average daily balance than we've ever really had, our interest has been extremely low. I included a note that came from the county on why the interest hasn't been performing clearly as it has in past years. So rather than just read all that, know that that is in there, and that our interest is much lower than anticipated. And unfortunately, this was the first update we did get from the county, so we didn't really have a chance to foresee that their higher yield bonds and investment vehicles would be declining so much. But we'll certainly budget accordingly for that next year and hope to exceed it. Total cash balance as of December 31st in the Treasury Fund was stated at 5.325 million. Again, of this, 400,000 are held as the board designated reserves. Approximately 13,000 is designated for MWPA expenditures. Additionally, there's approximately 335,000 that remained on that date from the financing loan acquired for the construction of the park maintenance facility. Take all of that into account, it leaves you with a net cash balance as of 12/31 of 4.577 million, which is an increase of approximately 820,000 over the same point in time in net revenue, or I'm sorry, net funds. Again, it should be noted that is simply a reflection of cash flow. That number can actually ebb and flow in either direction depending on cash flow. It's really kind of those year-end numbers that matter the most. But with that said, things are trending and moving in the way I expected them to. For this year, there's no big surprises that are coming out of this in any way, shape, or form. As of the other note I put in here is as of December 31st, the quarter end, the district's OPEB trust fund actually has crossed the $500,000 mark. So there's a little over $500,000 protected in that trust. And then looking forward with Q3, obviously we get a lot more revenue that's coming in with the recreation programs that start taking in registrations. Chunks of that obviously will wind up being deferred until next fiscal year, but from a cash flow perspective, they do come in. And then we also have already received our 50% of the CSA 13 contract that's coming in, and we also received the COVID relief fund. So if you look at this, even though it shows at the end of December, we spent a little bit more than we brought in. Those numbers have actually flipped by the end of January to where we're operating into a net revenue gain. That said, there's a couple other notes at the end of the P&L statements that just kind of try to explain some of the variances, but I'm happy to field any questions.
Thanks, Eric. Are there any questions? None?
Well, I was going to say that I like how conservative we were, and with expecting less than we actually got. I always have this question, and the answer is always the same. The MO is, the overtime with the fire department. And that's just going to keep continuing. There's really
Yeah.
nothing we can do.
Well, overtime, I mean, is always going to be a part of any fire department operations, just because you don't have extra staff. When one
Yeah.
person is off for a day, somebody else has to come in and fill in, and they're contracted to do that in overtime. I did make a note in here that approximately 26,000, a little over of that overtime fee will be reimbursed through strike team assignments or shared services for work performed in San Rafael. And then we've also been dealing with the long-term injury. So every third shift, we've got somebody doing 48 hours on overtime to cover that. And we did have a different injury that wasn't nearly as long-term, but they'd have somebody out of work for 4 to 6 weeks who's already come back and is back to full duty. So all of those kind of are what impact your overtime needs.
Yeah. No, I mean, same thing every year, but it's still a startling number. Okay, I'm done.
Any questions from the public?
Yeah, 1 second. Steven.
Yeah. So how come we haven't gotten the paramedic reimbursement?
Because
Yes.
that doesn't get billed until after the end of the second quarter.
Okay, I was just giving the chief a thrill. So the point I would wish to make is really that it's very, I don't think we have a really good structure to this report to understand how we can do a better job, because it mixes property tax revenues with rentals and business income. And if we were to separate that out, we could get much more I guess accountability in our programs, so we can target the programs that make us money and maybe get rid of some of the programs if necessary that don't make us money, to understand how much we're spending on community events versus other things which are basically subsidized. I kind of think of our finances as kind of a mess. It's just amalgam of expenses and revenues, and there's just no way to know unless you separate this out, what we can do to increase our revenues. The overtime pay is a concern. Why did we project for $100,000 of overtime pay, and all of a sudden we're looking at $200,000? That's 200% off the mark. We did hear an explanation, but quite frankly, did we do a good job in that realm? Should we have hired someone else in anticipating that there would be someone out all the time on some kind of medical? I don't know, but it seems like certain expenditures get out of control, and we don't see them so much because it's covered through other revenues. And the real idea of such reports is to help you manage our revenue better. So nothing more specific than what has already been stated. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen. Anything else from the public? If not, we can move on to the district manager report.
Sure. Just a few items of note in here. First one I want to bring up is there is some very worthwhile board training opportunities that are coming up. One that will be in person in the fall, but the same workshops that are being offered virtually. Unfortunately, the virtual workshops do start, I believe as early as next week. This is the Special District Leadership Academy. We've had past board members who've gone through this. I've also gone through it. I would probably say it's the preeminent training opportunity offered through the California Special Districts Association for helping board members, really kind of grasp and understand their roles as a board, areas that they can work on, things to address, understanding government, finance, so on and so forth. I would highly encourage anybody to attend, especially the virtual ones, if those are doable. Practice has always been for conferences or workshops for board directors that the board pays for the registration fees, but travel and lodging is the responsibility of the director if they choose to go to an in-person event. Obviously, with the virtual events, there are no registration or travel and lodging fees with those, unless you are paying yourself to sit in your office at home and do it. Otherwise, again, more information can certainly be sent. You all have CSDA accounts and can log onto the website to learn more too. I don't know that you have to attend all 4 modules if you aren't available, say next week for Feb 16 and 17, but you are available for module 2 or module 3 or 4 later in the year. I still strongly encourage board directors to participate in that. On the park maintenance facility, we are nearing the end of construction. It has gone relatively smoothly. Communication between builder, architect, and the district staff has remained constant. Final details are tentatively expected to be completed next week, with the completion punch list walkthrough occurring the week after. Unfortunately, just other matters have taken our time away. We haven't been able to complete the bid package for the exterior courtyards, but it's certainly a priority, and we're trying to get that done as quickly as we can so we can get it issued and receive some proposals for that as quickly as we can. And then finally, on the just note, it seems like we just finished the audit, just went through Q2 financials, but we're already starting to work on budget for next fiscal year. So for the next several board meetings leading up until the May board meeting, you'll be looking at draft iterations of the budget with the goal of final adoption of the May meeting. I believe it's May 10th. One thing that will need to be considered with this budget is we're going to have to, take a look at the wage scale for primarily our park and rec staff. It's been several years on many of them, some of them even since before I got here, since the wage scales have been adjusted. They're already very low in comparison to similar, but they're slipping farther behind. So I just wanted to let the board know that next month, and Luke and I will certainly be talking and looking at this on the park and rec side, and we'll be bringing some suggestions and ideas for this. But it's becoming a very competitive labor market, and we're just not only do we want to attract, but we also want to make sure we retain the high quality employees that we already have. So with that, that is my report. Happy to field any questions or comments.
That's Yvonne.
So once we go through the punch list walkthrough, can the guys start moving everything back in, or do we need to wait for the area in front and then back on the sides to be?
It'll be a little bit of both. The punch list is our walkthrough with the builder to make sure that everything is final and done according to plan. And then you go through your final inspection with the county that they will basically issue a certificate of occupancy. The total permit won't be closed off quite yet because the permit does include the courtyards. They will be able to start moving some things in. It's not going to be entirely functional until those courtyards are finished, just primarily because with the construction of the courtyards will prohibit, kind of coming and going and moving through there. But we wouldn't be able to start the construction of the courtyards until the building portion was done anyway, just simply by the fact that the courtyards weren't accepted as part of the initial bid. So this was always a planned, they were never going to be able to be done at the same time. So right now we're shooting for the certificate of occupancy to get the notice out as quickly as we can, inviting bids, and then be able to get that work going as quickly as possible. When that work is finished, then we'll move on to landscaping and the other minor details in the surrounding area that will close out the permit.
So do you think that we'll have access to the area where the Gaga ball pit and stuff is was by the time camps open? Or is that whole section going to be closed off? even
I
for
don't
camp?
know. To be quite honest with
Okay.
you, Siobhan, I don't know. We'll just have to kind of see how the timing goes. I know that that area was closed last year for camps too, and they
Yeah.
seem to be able to suffice with it as the way it was. So it'll just be one of those things that we want to keep a functioning area as long as we need to until
Right.
we can be fully ready to move in.
Yeah, just curious.
Understood.
I have a few questions. First about the building, does that include the inside as well? Or do we still have to, like, the kitchen, the bathroom, cupboards? I know that there was discussion of possibly having the guys kind of design a little bit of the inside. Is that still?
No, the things that you just mentioned will be done. Cabinetry has already gone in, tile in the showers going in, paint, all of that kind of stuff will be done. Any customization that those guys want to do, I think is going to
Correct.
evolve over time through use as they realize kind of the best ways and flow of doing it. And Luke, certainly feel free to chime in. And we've certainly tried to put measures in place that will help ease that customization for them. But, until they know exactly where they want every single little piece of equipment and tool and storage needs to go, that'll be kind of an evolving process. But as far as, cabinetry, hardware, a sink, all of that the bathroom, everything like that, it will be finished detail and done.
Okay. And then my next thing is I'll touch base with you. I'm happy to do the workshops.
Great.
So I'll probably need help getting into my account because, I log in all the time.
Yeah, great. And I should have mentioned that, in the past, we've been able to secure scholarships for the registration fees for 2 of the board members that went through it. So we can certainly put that application in as well and hopefully be able to defer some of the costs that way. Why don't you touch base with me tomorrow and I can help you make sure you get registered and do all of that.
Will do.
Great.
And then the other thing that I want to touch base on is when you make your recommendation for our budget and the pay scale, is this something that we will have to address every year since the cost of living is adjusted? Or reason for my question is a lot of our staff is in the E schedule or the EE or whatever the levels are. And so let's take the park, the maintenance guys, they're both EE. So we may move our schedule, but then they max out again. So I just want to make sure that we address this to not have to readdress every year. So
Yeah, I think I'm following what you're saying. At the end of the day, just to be clear, so what you have is what's known as a public pay schedule. And that has to be approved by the board, and it does actually have to be approved by the board every year. So every year the board, and we typically do that in June, following the adoption of the budget. And then the budget process is a good time to look at that. I certainly don't disagree with you in that, kind of to some of Bill's point that he was making earlier and looking at the audit. We've been trying to climb into a financial position to allow us to even think this way. I feel like we've gotten there in a long part, but that financial position or not, we're a service-based organization. And if you can't pay your staff competitive wages, the staff is what provides our service. So that becomes tricky too. So I do think it should be something that should be reviewed, if not annually, at least on a biannual basis, just to make sure it's keeping up with any cost of living adjustments, comparable wages, so on and so forth.
yeah, I mean, I think we're very lucky to have the longevity in our staff, but if anything should happen, we still have to be competitive in order to bring somebody on and not be empty-handed. So
I would agree. I also think Luke would agree, and it's been a major deterrent towards trying to fill that third position in the parks department, especially that's been vacant for a long time. I mean, all the work that you've seen going on has been primarily Esteban and Marco, who work very hard and, to your point, are very dedicated to the district and the community. We've been able to kind of fill it with some part-time or temporary or hourly help, hoping that some of those people might evolve into a full-time role. Unfortunately, we just haven't been able to locate that person yet, but I certainly think that the opening scale is probably turning away a lot of very qualified applicants as well.
And thank you.
Okay.
All right. Anyone else on the board? Questions, comments, anything from the public?
Yeah, 1 second, please. Stephen.
Yes, thank you. So good, we're coming to the end of the construction of the park maintenance facility, but there's still some questions. First of all, and a comment, it's much bigger than even I thought it was going to be. Basically, that building blocks access that we once had to the nature trail and the Miller Creek trail. So it was presented as open space in front of the building, and hopefully that is actually, I guess I'd like to ask, is that still part of the plan, to pull down the existing fence line and just have the 2 courtyards? Is that the way it is now, what you're expecting?
Yeah, Stephen, I'm jotting down your questions. Go ahead and finish your comment and I'll address them.
Okay, so the other comment that came up, and I guess I just kind of want to make this comment. You bought the 2 storage containers thinking that you could use them in those yards, and if that happens, there may be some bad ramifications for the district. I don't want to issue a threat, but I do know that would change the drainage in that area, and some environmentalist groups would be concerned about that, as well as some citizens would be concerned about that. So we just want to make sure that the beautiful facility that we've built is built to a quality standard, the same quality standard as the building itself. Now, with regards to our maintenance department, I agree they should be paid competitively, but that also means that their duties should also be competitive. And in comparing our staff that I think still gets off at 2:30, they start early and they knock off at 2:30. That's not what happens in the county park system. They knock off at 4 or 5. And so they work a much larger territory, much larger responsibilities than our guys. I know those guys, they work hard, but let's not lose sight of the fact that when thinking of comparative salaries, it should be for comparative responsibilities. I would actually like to see a 3rd person in that department, because I would like somebody who is more knowledgeable in the open space and could do more in the open space. And I guess that's all that I have for right now. Thanks.
Thank you, Stephen.
I'm happy to address a couple of these if you'd like, if there's time. In terms of size of the building, it's built to the plan, so the size of the building hasn't changed according to the original plans. Yes, when the construction is done, mostly on the courtyards, the fencing around there will come down, and that area again will be landscaped and the path will be rerouted, and it's actually, I believe, going to create more usable space out there than what previously existed. As far as the storage containers, it's not part of the plan right now to utilize them in that area. We certainly have options with those containers, and they are very convenient for us to have. Storage is something not just on the park side, but especially on the rec side that we don't have much of. So when we are done with that use, Luke and I will discuss further what could possibly be done with them. And Stephen is right, there are allowable considerations that need to be taken into account. And then of course, another option is to purchase or to sell them. They weren't purchased for the option, for the idea of they'll be used in the future. They were purchased with the idea that they were needed to be used now, while they didn't have a facility to put things in. And then just, I got to touch on the, as far as the county or the park maintenance staff are knocking off early, our park maintenance staff puts in a 40-hour week. They're hourly employees. They work hard. They do show up early. They leave at the end of an 8-hour day. And in terms of county workers in a larger territory, they also have a much larger total staff count than we would ever have as well. So it's all relative if you look at it that way.
Thank you, Eric. All right, so moving on to fire department matters. First item, draft minutes of the fire commission meeting, February 1st, 2022.
I'll start. I don't really have that much. We had actually a short, specific meeting. It wasn't, there's nothing much to touch on that's not in Chief White's report, so I don't want to take his thunder. But I do want to just follow up with Eric and refresh my memory who we talked about contacting. So Todd Ellsbury is really concerned about the eucalyptus trees in the entry when you come into Marinwood. So in our meeting, I've explained to him that the board, that it's not our property, it's the County of Marin's, and that it's not something that we really want to take on with pruning the trees. That means that we would take on that expense, we would take on the responsibility. It's not really an avenue that I think that we would want to go down just by automatic of adoption. But there was, who did Ron suggest that we reached out to, and do you remember?
Yeah, right. Well, and who we also talked about was seeing if our local supervisor's office, Damon Connolly's office, could get involved and potentially help. It's just one of those situations where the county really doesn't do little, if any, roadway median maintenance in any of their unincorporated territory roads. We've had, these kind of back and forth with them on other issues for years and years and years to come. And that's just one area that it does need to be addressed, because those trees, quickly do get overgrown and they're going to become a hazard and a liability. And if a large branch were to fall on a vehicle or something, they would be held liable for it. And I'm sure would then decide to address it. So we are working on trying to bring that to the forefront as best we can. That said, it's not quite as easy as it sounds, in terms of eliciting action from them. And then that was also one of the notes on the minutes there too. So that was a good thing to talk about.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring it up for you guys, just in case, he stops you or says something that, you guys are aware that we have discussed that problem. So thanks. Chief White, take it away.
Good evening, Board of Directors and District Manager Drykosen. I'm a pleasure to be with you this evening. And as Director Kilkenny indicated, it's a fairly short report this week. And I'll start right in on MWPA. In my report, there are a couple of images of some work that was being done right around the time we had the heavy rains. And unfortunately, as you've seen since then, the last several weeks have shown no rain whatsoever, and forecasted not to have any rain over at least the next week and a half moving forward. And so the great thing is, though, that the crews did a lot of great work in several plus acres of land, clearing out woody debris, ladder fuels, and some of the hazardous species in the upper Lucas Valley open space areas. And so as you know, that creates the potential to reduce the rate of spread of wildfire and creates defensible space simultaneously. So this is important work that's taking place even in what we used to consider the off season. As we know now, there's no more off season. fires year round. We're seeing incidents here in the Bay Area. We're seeing incidents in the South Bay and beyond. We're seeing incidents Santa Barbara, Santa Clara, Monterey, you name it. It's still an ongoing concern for us. And with the moisture that we received, it's going to create additional growth, which ultimately is going to cause, if we don't get any more moisture on those fuels, additional drying fuel for more fuel for this coming spring and summer and fall. So we're really holding out hope that there's going to be some more rain. That being said, our staff is in the early stages of planning for goat grazing to take place in much the same locations as has goat grazing taken place in previous years. And so that effort is something that we look forward to annually. And ironically, I just had recent conversations about the value of owning our own goats and pushing those out for projects for San Rafael and Marinwood, as opposed to waiting on a vendor to bring in goats and watching potentially pricing hikes based on the competition and or demand for that kind of service. And so more information may follow. I haven't had this discussion with Quinn Gardner yet, but that's going to be a major undertaking in so many ways. I don't know that I want to go down that road, but I think it's really well worth it, considering that they're a very effective way of reducing vegetation in the community. So
I gotta ask,
on that.
where would you house them? They're not
Well,
walking
that's,
around.
that's part of the question, right? I had heard West Marin has a wide open expanse that we might want to negotiate with some folks in that area, but I don't know. Again, that's a lot of work. So
See, and I'm thinking, can you use them for yoga?
goats for yoga. Wow.
It's a thing now.
Is it really? I had no idea.
Yes.
Okay. Well,
So thank you.
in addition to that fuel reduction work, there's been some recent information where Marinwood residents are now eligible to apply for San Rafael and our zone grants. Two different types of grants. They're listed in the report. I don't want to read the links to you right offhand unless you'd like me to. They do require full inspections, and they are eligible for retroactive requests for going back to last year, as an example, provided you have the available documentation to be able to submit for those grants. And so I encourage folks, because those grants are available on a first come, first served basis. So if you're interested, I say, why not give it a shot and see what happens? And maybe you can offset some of the previous costs you had and or upcoming costs you may have in the way of reducing some of the threat on your properties.
And that includes replacement of windows, right? And siding and.
Well, I think anything that might involve home hardening or hardening of the perimeter of your home, I think that may be qualifying. But again, I haven't looked at specific what they would reimburse for per se.
My husband was asking me, he was like, since you are on all these boards, what do
Right.
you know about this? And I was like, I'll get back to you.
Okay. Well, I would certainly go to the website and make sure. There has been a push from the Marin County Fire Chiefs Association to have this managed by the MWPA staff, because we were looking at differing criteria for grant qualification, as an example, through different agencies. And we decided that's probably not the ideal approach, much in the manner that the MWPA was formed, to make sure we were doing things on a standardized basis throughout the county. There may be some adjustments that are being made to ensure that what best practices are occurring in one community occurs in all other communities as well. So I wouldn't want to be premature and say those things qualify, but I can't see why they would not, provided you have the documentation and it's specifically related to reducing the wildfire threat on your property and or your structure. COVID continues to be this significant issue. Just today, we received a draft of a document. I wasn't able to review it as of yet. I'm going to forward that to District Manager Drykosen either later tonight or tomorrow morning. And this is a county public health order that's been recently modified, and it looks as if there's a goal to align with what's happening in other jurisdictions throughout the state right now in the way of mandatoring the vaccination requirement for first responders, primarily law, EMS, and fire personnel. I don't think we're really looking at public works staff so much with that order, but public works personnel are considered first responders, and that's why I just mentioned that. That being said, it looks like there's going to be a hard stance taken where if individuals aren't vaccinated and or fully updated, meaning they have the booster shots as well, then unless they apply for and receive an exemption for either medical or religious reasons, then they may be facing reassignment and or potentially unemployment in this county anyway. And so San Jose Fire Department went through something similar just about 3 weeks ago. Actually, not even that long, about 2 weeks ago. And they lost some 40 to 50 of their personnel temporarily. And they're still landing on how they're going to approach moving forward, because that's a roughly 5 to 8% of their staff right away who will not be available. Speaking to the deputy chief there, some of those staff have already engaged and taken the vaccinations, but there's going to be some that are going to still continue to resist. I just received information from another Marin County Fire Chief Association member just about an hour ago, right before the start of this meeting, that the Los Angeles Board of Supervisors are looking at terminating 4,000 law enforcement personnel who have opted not to, I'm assuming, either provide their vaccination status or receive vaccination or apply for an exemption. And so it looks like there's really a hardline approach that's coming pretty soon here from some agencies. Very, very contentious times on the way. Staffing challenges may result as a result of some of this as well. When you look at numbers like that, that's unimaginable, the impact it's going to have on those individuals who stay and continue to work and are vaccinated. The amount of overtime, mandatory overtime and things of that nature is probably going to start to skyrocket pretty quickly. So more of that to follow, but all of that to say is that there was a concern about a new variant emerging. Turns out that variant so far has not really received a lot of traction and or attention because it's not necessarily as infectious as Omicron and some of the other predecessors. So they're keeping an eye on it, but at this point in time, there are several cases in the South Bay, and there's other cases in other states such as Washington State and Texas. There's actually reports about it around the world in places like Denmark and other countries. But at this point, there's not something that's been really issued as a major consideration or concern for us. But given that, who knows what the next variant might look like. So just wanted to share that, this is something on the horizon. Hopefully it's not going to get a lot of traction and therefore won't get a lot of attention, and we can start moving towards what appears to be those post-COVID times when it comes to masking and social distancing and all those other things that we are really looking forward to as a society in general. I know I'm looking forward to those days, so as I'm sure all of you are. So that being said, last but not least, our fire department actually responded to 105 calls up to the point where this report was generated. And I think it was generated on the last day of David Catalanoto's. No, I take that back. That was the previous report. No, this report was actually generated on the last day of David Catalanoto's tenure with our organization. And we had 105 responses, 2 that were structure fires and 1 that was a vegetation fire. And there were roughly 9 individuals that they believed or confirmed were EMS calls involving patients who had COVID. I'm going to assume it's the Omicron as opposed to the Delta or the previous COVID infection, since Omicron was so rampant and running through the communities. It ran through the San Rafael and multiple other Marin County fire departments. Where there was a lot of fluctuation with individuals either being considered close contacts or somehow or another having to isolate as a result of them becoming COVID positive. And so a lot of guidance on this, a lot of moving landscape, as Eric can attest to, but we're hoping to land on something here really soon. But that being said, our response time, sub 6 minutes now. So the month where we had all the rain, I think that accounted for what I had, assumed was an increase in the amount of time it took for our total response time, getting out the door, getting underway, getting on scene. But now at this point, we're sub 6 minutes, which is right about where we used to be. Again, 5 minutes, 42 seconds. I say it every time. This almost looks like an identical number to others I've seen, but this is great. It's reflective of the consistency that our crews are providing when they're getting out the door quickly and getting on scene in less than 6 minutes almost every time. So with that, if there's any questions, I'm happy to field them.
I'll say a smart aleck remark. So next month will be our first time with a new person doing the numbers, right?
Yeah,
We'll
we have
see.
Thomas Wong. He's going to run the numbers. He actually told me that he's got someone else that he's worked with that can help generate the reports without having to take the same amount of time and or the tediousness that David Catalanotto used to do. I think he's figured out a way to maybe generate the reports a little bit with maybe a little more detail, or at least identical, with less time invested in trying to get the report. So
That would be
I'll see
awesome.
what next month's report looks like, and if there's any major differences, I'll point them out for sure.
I was just gonna say the smart aleck remark, but yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Chief. Any questions? Any questions or comments from the board? All right, any questions or comments from the public?
Yeah, Lisa, and before I go there, just a quick point of order. We kind of breezed right from the minutes into the chief report. We've failed to ask for public comment on the fire commission minutes. So I would double back and do that first and then go for public comment on the chief report.
Okay, can so we want to have two separate public comment? Okay, that's fine.
Yeah,
Yeah, all right. Sure. So let's do public comments on the minutes first then.
sure. 1 second. Stephen.
Thanks, Eric, for pointing that out. Yeah, I don't have a lot of comments on the minutes other than I don't understand why we aren't getting a video record while we're doing Zoom calls. Virtually every public meeting that I have attended during this COVID time has been recorded. It really looks like, you know, people don't want to be accountable for what they're saying, and I don't know why, because they're doing fine work. They shouldn't be ashamed of it. But what the effect it does is it breeds distrust. And I don't think you can manage district well unless you're reaching out to the public and letting them know what's going on. The reports, while quite good, Kathleen gave a good report. They necessarily are incomplete because she is simply giving her version of what was important at the meeting. So we can have good records. And I think you need to ask yourself, what is the point of not keeping good records? So that's all I have to say to that. And I might as well just, since it's open, I might as well just continue on with the chief's report. The chief, I love the idea of us having a goat herd. In fact, maybe that third person that I call the open space ranger or the caretaker could be also part-time goat herd operator. We could outfit them with a four-wheel drive, you know, I forget what they call those little motorcycle thingies, but you know, we certainly have the open space where we can keep those goats busy pretty much year round. I don't know what is all involved in managing a goat herd, so I don't want to presume too much, but I think it's a very tantalizing idea and would reduce cost to the district, and it'd be fun. You know, we'd be a town with its own goat herds. So I just think that would just be kind of cool. We do have mountain lions up in the hills, so that might be a challenge. But yeah, let's nature do its thing, and let's have all the help we can from the goats. I'm glad we're doing this fuel reduction program. It seems obviously it's been overdue for a lot of years. The other point I wanted to address or maybe talk to the fire chief about, and I think I speak for many people that if I were having a situation where we needed to call emergency services, I wouldn't give a damn who responds to the call, whether they were vaccinated or not. I know I am. And I just think it is a terrible thing to take away opportunities from our trained firefighters for this vaccine, which, as far as we know, it's for the first version of the virus. So I just think that I hope cooler heads prevail. I hope they follow the science. And I think we're going to have a lot of heartache here if we're too hard on our fire staff. We just need to be reasonable with this. These are the guys who have protected us during the COVID crisis when there was no vaccine. So to punish them now is just really a slap in the face of those working men and women. So please do what you can, Chief. At least know that some of us out here would not support firing a lot of fire staff because of a vaccine requirement. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Stephen. Any other comments from the public?
No, that is it.
All right, Chief White, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Before I go, can I just make a brief response to the statements? I don't want to interject my personal feelings on vaccination or the importance of it. I do want to share that I know people who passed away from COVID, especially the first iteration of COVID. And if you're not vaccinated, you're more likely to contract COVID and or spread it to others. Before the variant started, before we got into this political dynamic when it comes to vaccination and not being vaccinated, everyone understood that vaccine was needed. Even some of our first responders were first at the door knocking, saying we need vaccination so that we're protected and we can go out and safely perform our service to the public. And to now do an about face and not be willing to protect yourself, to protect the public you serve and or your families, and especially when the science has proven that the vaccines are a very effective tool to prevent transmission to those that are vulnerable, whether it be our elderly, whether it be those with pre-existing conditions, or whether it be family members, or even with yourself, where you may not even realize you have some sort of susceptibility. I think it's not being very responsible. I certainly understand and appreciate individuals' rights to opt not to take a vaccination, but in our society, we've used vaccinations over and over again when we send our kids to school, when we take positions in public safety, as an example. And so it just seems sometimes we're operating out of fear and anxiety as opposed to following the science and realizing the vaccine wasn't to prevent us from receiving COVID. It was to prevent us from having the most severe exposure and outcomes from being infected with COVID. And so if we're not willing to protect ourselves and then therefore protect the public, let's think about what the alternative would be. Let's think if our military, as an example, hands down said, I don't want to take the vaccine. And then one by one, members are infected or start dropping from COVID. How does that decimate our ability to protect our way of life here in our country? And likewise, being a paramilitary organization, the fire service, I think, has an obligation to take the responsibility seriously of protecting the public. And we swore and we took an oath to do that. And maybe it didn't say specifically we had to be vaccinated, but in taking that oath, there's certain things we've sacrificed. We sacrificed time from our families when we have to work mandatory overtime. We sacrifice in other areas. I just think this is another point of division in our society that we got to rally around and figure out, how we're going to approach this and approach this safely. Otherwise, we'll be dealing with COVID for decades to come, much like HIV is now something we've been dealing with for the last 4+ decades. And so I share that just from my professional and or slightly personal perspective. And again, I don't want to create a debate or create any sort of angst amongst anyone. I feel strongly that we have an obligation to protect the public, and we're not doing that if we're not vaccinated. As we saw with Omicron, even with vaccination, people were getting breakthrough infections. So if you look at it from that lens, the more we can do to protect ourselves is the more we can potentially do to protect the public that we serve. Because I'd hate to be the source for someone that I go out and provide care to, and now they had an adverse impact because I brought COVID to their front door. So that's just my take, and others don't necessarily see it from that lens, and I'm well aware of that.
Very well said. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Very, very well said. And I stand 1000% behind you.
Well, thank you. I would hope that, we'll see how things play out, but to the point that was making, I don't want to lose any employees due to COVID itself or due to their failure to want to become vaccinated. But there's some tough decisions that may be on the horizon here. We'll just see how things progress. So, but thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Good night.
Right.
Good night.
Thanks, Chief. Okay.
So moving on to Park and Recreation matters. Draft minutes, Park and Recreation Commission meeting of January 25th.
I would defer that to Director Case, who
Case.
spent his first meeting last month as the PNR liaison.
Oh yeah. Hey, I just want to start off by saying that I was really impressed with this commission. We've got some great people that are helping our community. The level of expertise, and I know John Campo's on with us right now. John and his fellow commissioners just really, it was very impressive. It was exciting to hear what they were talking about. The waterway trail is going to be another agenda item, so I'm going to leave that. We definitely spoke about that quite a bit, and I'll jump in as needed when we're talking about that as a specific agenda item. I would say the biggest thing that we discussed apart from that was the play structure replacement project. We got a first pass at the data that came out of the survey. And I think Eric and the staff are going to do a deeper dive given an additional month, and we'll report more at the next meeting. But some of the things that jumped out that were discussed were things like 70% or so of the respondents visit the park at least once a week, which, that was pretty impressive. We know this park gets a lot of use, but to see that in numbers was pretty interesting.
How many responses do we get?
Say that again.
How many responses do we get?
Eric, I didn't write that down. Do you
It was a little over 130.
Yeah. Okay. That's funny. I was going to say 130.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of individual play structure ideas that were put in that kind of need to be sifted through. Things like swings. There was a lot of stuff about climbing features. We had a discussion about, making things more challenging in terms of the physical activities that were in there. And it was really interesting just to hear everybody's different perspective, both on the commission and then the people who, of course, had submitted survey ideas, and there were a lot of them. I'm just sifting through my notes here. That it really came down to the concept of, that we more or less, the concept is we got to keep it within that same footprint, or if we decide not to, there becomes a bigger discussion that could certainly be had. But that was sort of one of the points of discussion was about the size of it. Could we do things outside of that existing fencing if that were a direction that we wanted to go in. And Eric, definitely correct me if I'm wrong here, but one of your big takeaways was that as we start to quantify the data a little bit more, would be to take the most important points based on that data and to go out to companies that design these for a living and kind of get their ideas about how we could best design with, obviously with the constraints that we have. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah, the invitation to bids that are going to go out is going to be for a design, what's called design and build. So rather than us saying, here's the exact playground we want, tell us how much it'll cost you to build it. You send this out to various playground companies that do design and install work. So it'll all be kind of one package, and it'll give us that said, we'll certainly cull the results from the survey and other feedback and highlight those and make that part of the invitation, ask them to respond to this with their design.
Right. Perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
From there, we talked about the waterway, which again will be discussed a little bit later in our meeting. The next big one was just reviewing erosion that some spots that had been sites for erosion and damage that may be causing some worries about our infrastructure. And Luke provided that really we were quite lucky about that in this last rainy season, that things remain stable. And we already heard how the staff is addressing them, putting in a lot of time and effort, and doesn't go unnoticed that they're like wading through the creek. And just Stephen commented as we were moving through the meeting, and I thought just continually brought up some good points, things to think about when we consider both the park structure and as we also start to consider the open space, which led into Ian Fine suggested having a bit of a brainstorm about what we could be doing in the open space that's seems to be reasonable and within our construct. And then I asked if we take a look at that fireman's picnic area. There's some like I took a walk through there. There's actually like a couple of barbecues in there, and I was just citing that we may want to think about that in terms of safety issues. It was pretty clear that somebody had some sort of a campfire in there. When I walked through, there were some big logs that were partially burned, and just taking a look at what resources we have there. And again, I've talked about it with you guys as well. Like, how can we, potentially reallocate those resources if it's determined that we want to. Anybody have any questions after looking at the agenda? All right, then that is my report.
Sorry.
Thanks, Director Case. That was great. Any comment from the public or questions?
Yeah, 1 second, please. Stephen.
Yeah, I also attended, and it was a great meeting. And I'm so happy that Chris is on that board, and Ian as well, because correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, I think you grew up here, and I know Ian did, and you have a big connection to the parks and the open space. And it was so much fun because people were really kind of excited and thinking of ideas of how we can really make the district wonderful. And so it was really quite an encouraging meeting. I wish you could have seen it. We could have pressed record like most government meetings on Zoom. It would have been easy to do, but it was kind of a testament to the board on how well they work together and how they think of creative solutions for the future of our district. I'd love to talk to you on a one-to-one basis, Chris, on the Quietwood Grove or Fireman's Picnic area, whatever you want to call it. I do since I live just a few doors up from it, I frequent that on a daily basis, and I do have some ideas how we can make that better. And I want you to assure everyone that that area does get a lot of use. You see parties in there, you see a lot of activity. People use it to kind of veg out underneath the trees. I've used it for music groups, and there's more opportunities there, but that's kind of a different discussion. We're going to talk about some of the other issues, I guess, later. I like the idea that were brought up on the play structures. I like the ideas of possibly going outside the play structure areas, the fenced areas, and maybe putting in some climbing structures. They're easy to do and could be for a different set of children. Another idea was to have I suggested, well, maybe have a number of teepees, and the kids it could be kind of a fantasy village for kids to play in. There's a lot of things we could do. We could put something like that in Blackstone Canyon, for example. We got a lot of money for these structures, and I think if we do it right, we can really put a lot of improvements into our parks, and I hope we do that. So I'm going to just leave it at that and let the meeting continue.
Thank you, Stephen. Anything else from the public?
No.
All right. So then moving on to the Miller Creek Waterway Trail.
Yeah.
Quality assessment.
Can I ask a question before we get into that?
Sure.
I'll state the question and you can tell me if I need to wait till later. It is a park and recreation, but it harks back slightly to what Kathleen was saying with the eucalyptus trees in the county and maintenance. So land design comes through and does like the median work right in front of the fire department. But then on the other side that abuts the fences for the homes that are right there on Appleberry that go to the back, those all have ivy, and a lot of those homes are struggling with rodents. And is that county property? So it would be county that they would need to talk to about doing abatement of all that ivy?
Correct.
Okay. And could they do it on their own, or do they have to contact them?
I'm sure if they started doing it on their own, nobody would complain to them. I can't tell you that they can. I mean, that's roadway right away. It's county right away property. So
Okay.
I'm sure if they wanted to reach out to the county and the roads division, that would probably be a good place to start.
Okay, is that the same person that would be doing where the eucalyptus are?
Most likely, if we could ever identify who those proper people are, they tend to constantly point fingers in different, whoever you get to says, oh yeah, that's not me, try this people, or no, that's not me, try this. So it's a bit of a rabbit hole.
If you ever get that, if we're going to be working on that, otherwise I can try to work on it too. If you can point me in the right direction of who to start with, I can do that too. And then I will hand that information out to the people who butt that up, because they're all having a pretty terrible rat infestation on and off.
I don't think it's just them. I think it's also the time of year, because there was 3 houses on my block this week that had to pull out and have their house inspected. So
Yeah, no, because I'm like across the street
ivy.
from them and I don't have anything. And so I'm assuming it's all that ivy that is abutting. That's where they like to live. And we have no ivy on our property. So I'm wondering, like, I don't know. I'm just trying to be helpful. Because they were asking me like if that was Marinwood CSD property. And I said, I don't think that is, but I can find out whose it is and stuff. So, okay, sorry. Now we can dive into the most important part.
I am confident, Siobhan, if anyone can get a name, you can. So keep us posted on what you find.
I was gonna say, why don't they apply for the grant? That sounds like a home hardening project.
Oh.
But some of those are rentals. I don't know if you can I don't know. All right.
All right, so
Whatever.
let's talk about the waterway trail.
Yeah, I want to, before you get started on that, I'm gonna, Park Commissioner John Campo, who actually has a lot of professional experience in trail design and building, has been waiting patiently for this. I want to bring him over as a panelist. He was very helpful in kind of sharing some information with this report when it came out and presenting it to there. So I had asked him if he would mind giving us some of his time this evening to join us. So John, thank you very much for coming along for the ride. Just before he gets going, you know, I did give you a fairly detailed staff report and tried to give as much background towards this as I could, you know, from an agreement that occurred 16 years ago with completely different parties, different landowners, different developers. You know, and a couple of the key points I wanted to highlight in there is, if you know, in reading this agreement, there is a cost estimate that is stated in the form of a potential performance bond that is in the that is stated as $29,000. Obviously, that's far different from what we are going to be looking at, but I do think it represents some kind of important context as to the developer's financial obligations in this. This is not an action item at this point in time for the board. We're not looking for action, but I did list on page 2 of my report some staff recommendations and some potential direction from the board, assuming we want to continue to kind of move forward and pursue this project. With that said, I do want John to kind of highlight, and thank you again, John, for joining us, some of the notions of the report. I can pull it up, John, or if you have it, you're welcome to share your screen if that's easiest for you as well.
Yeah, if I can share screens, I have
Yep.
it up. Yep. Okay. Before I do that, I guess I'll just say, so Eric had contacted Tim Best. I don't know if folks know that. And Tim Best was the guy that did the design work for Queenstone Fire Road. And he's also somebody that I've worked for years with different projects with the county. And so I had met him on site and kind of collaborated with him a little bit on this report. I was really happy with the level of detail that he provided. We didn't pay that much for it, and he provided a lot of content. And then we kind of teased out different options that I thought would be useful, such as you know, different variations on width, on designation, like hiking only versus hiking, biking, and talked a lot about sustainability. And my impression is that if we were to move ahead with this, and this is a very exciting opportunity, that we would want to do it in a way that it's very sustainable and safe. And so Tim provided different options for that. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Are you seeing that?
Yep. Yeah, you're up.
Okay. So if folks have had a chance to look at it, this table is really useful. It shows different options. So 1A is the preferred. And so that's for a 5-foot wide trail that would accommodate hikers and cyclists. It's done in the most sustainable way that, you know, is for reasonable cost. And that cost is $274,000. And then kind of different variations on that down to, you know, 2B, which is a narrow 2-foot wide trail. It's done in a manner where it wouldn't have rock buttressing to improve sustainability. It wouldn't reduce grades. There would be chances of erosion and landslides further down the road. And so that's a much lower cost. And so to look at, you know, these maps there's a lot of details on these maps, and I'm, you know, won't go into all of that right now, but the alignment doesn't change all that much, at least on this scale of this map. So here's Las Colinas on this side, the school is over here. And so this is the starting point for the trail alignment. And so it skirts behind these houses here, follows the creek channel. And then you see these different colored lines, the purple, the red, the green. There are slight variations, and those slight variations actually mean a lot in regards to sustainability and grade. And essentially they all come out to the end, which is where the development is on the other side. And this end of the alignment is very adjustable and modifiable depending on the development. This section through here that hugs along the creek is really not. There really isn't a lot of opportunities other than illustrated on this map. If folks have been on this, in this location, they understand how it's pretty steep right along a creek bank. That creek that I did not know this, Tim pointed it out, it had been moved. So you can see this is the original location of Miller Creek prior to the development of Casa Marinwood. And so that during that development, that probably moved the creek. And as a result, this section of the creek right here is extremely steep banks. And so that's where some of the rock buttressing and realignments would go. I could talk about it more, but maybe do folks have questions about what they're seeing here?
I have a question. If there's erosion at any point, let's say in the next 20 years, would we have to build a bridge at any point of this?
That's a good question. And so when the first time I walked this with Eric, I was a little concerned. I was actually a lot concerned because to me, it looked like potential bridge structures would be needed. And that immediately brings the cost up significantly because not only would you need to construct the bridge, which can be tens of thousands of dollars, but then it also involves regulatory permitting, which also adds another layer of complexity to it. I'm not imagining a bridge would be in the future here. There may be erosion and there may be slight failures, but I don't think those failures would result in a bridge. This section of the trail over on this end, the west end, you can see on the scale on this map is small, but there's a little stream channel right here, and that drains out of a culvert. And so what Tim was able to do was put the trail above that stream initiation. And so there's no need for a bridge there. The other section that I was concerned about is right in this area. And because it looks like a stream channel, but apparently from this housing development over here, the drainage has changed to the point where water no longer flows down that channel. So there's no need for a bridge there. So that's huge, the fact that no bridges are needed. The only type of construction other than grading would be rock buttressing. And so essentially it's almost like it's like a layer of rocks, and then the trail would sit on those layer of rocks, and that would support the outside edge of the trail.
And are those like big, huge boulders?
They are.
Okay.
Yeah, and one of the things that
That's
we
what I
talked
figured.
about in the parks meeting was, this is not something that really is a volunteer effort build. This is a professional trail builder with a mini excavator, with toters to carry pretty large boulders, with surveying equipment. It would be, highly designed and done to a professional standard. And I guess I would make that comparison to the Horn Trail, which many of us probably hike and love, and it's great. It's not in the best condition. The condition of that is only going to get worse. One of the things that Eric and Luke and I talked about was we don't have a big staff. We don't want this to become a burden for the district staff down the road. We want to do it at a very high level of sustainability right out of the gate. Even with that, it'll still require maintenance. Every trail does, but we don't want it to unravel over time. Eventually, as a district, as a CSD, we would probably want to consider making improvements to the Horn Trail as well. So I would just add that to the kind of perspective.
So I agree with you that we don't want to make our staff even more overwhelmed than it is. Are there between 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, or 3, ones that give us the least amount of future maintenance. And
Okay.
what, Bill? Like, I'm just saying, like, if we,
1A
like,
without a doubt.
let's say we spend 274,000, are we really, my question is, do we definitely not then have to do as much maintenance as the 101,000? And is that really 163,000? Personally, my gut, I would like to do 1A. We would have to figure out how to finance that. But I'm just wanting to make sure that there's a reason for the 163,000. It's not just the initial cost, but that we won't then later have a potential, as people said, with erosion or other various things and maintenance costs that will bring up the cost from the 101,000 all the way up. You know what I mean?
I do. Can I add one thing though?
Yeah.
I thought that this wasn't 100% on our budget to do this trail. I thought that it was also on the table for the builder to cover some. Am I mistaken? Like, I thought that we were
We're
having
hoping.
a conversation about this because the assistant living facility was going in and they wanted to have this trail. So,
Well, they have 29,000. That's what we're definitely getting if we do it. But we're hoping to negotiate more, hopefully. And if not, I'm hoping that we can figure out other grants or other ways of paying for it, that this is not all coming from our district's coffers. But I do feel like this is what our district does. Our district has trails for everybody to use. And this would be a
Correct.
huge benefit for our district.
but I think at that point, without knowing how much we're getting from the build, I think we're putting the cart before the horse before we choose which one to go. I think we all just need to really understand the project as a whole from John before we pick a line item and try to find financing for it.
Well, no, I know, but I'm just wanting to see before we pick, if we buy the top, if we decide on the 1A, is it really deferring by putting all that money up front? Even if we end up having to pay for more of that up front, is it really going to help us long-term, not having more maintenance work and costs later on? That was my question. Sorry if I wasn't so clear.
John, I'll let you
Honor-
address
honor-
that first, and then I'd like to follow up on it too, but I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
I was just gonna say, anybody who was at the meeting, definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but like the most vocal people at the meeting about this trail were all about 1A, because it's a very unique opportunity for us to have a hiking and biking trail that will link, Miller Creek School ultimately down to a road that will then cut over to the market without having to be on Miller Creek Road with the amount of traffic that gets. John talked about activating this trail as a means to negating potential illegal camping. The more people that are using it, the more people are on it, then, so that's a positive as well. And we just saw this as a very unique opportunity. I know I'm reading this with some bias because yes, I'll say that I like this project. But the way the original documentation was put, these people can't build this they can't develop that property without doing a trail for us. It states that really clearly in what Eric included for us today. Now, 29,000 isn't going to cut it. They've already offered us 35, and we sent them back saying, come on, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. We're going to investigate and make sure we want to build this trail. So I think really what we need to do is decide, is this something that we want to do, which is, what we're being tasked with today. It's not to approve or deny any of these, but it's to say to the staff, do we want them to continue to investigate this or not?
Yeah, if I could respond to Savan's question, it's actually a good one, because I feel like right here you kind of see some of the description of the difference between, like, what's the difference between 111,000 versus 274,000. So let me go to the map. It's going to be hard to see on this scale, but I'll try and tease it out. So the cheaper version would not include this realignment right here. So you see that blue dotted line, that's the current, because there's an old road cut there now. And so a lot of this trail follows that road cut, but there's portions of it that do not make sense to keep it along that old road cut. So right here, we're talking about pulling away from the creek. So that's an additional cost that would require rock buttressing, vegetation removal, grading. But what that buys us is long-term stability, less chances for the creek to erode out the trail. And in its current alignment, if you get a chance, you should walk it. There's this section of the trail is right on top of, pretty steep drop off. And, if we're looking at trying to create a trail that's safe and sustainable for kids going from Marinwood to school, dog walkers, cyclists, we really don't want the trail right on the edge of a 20-foot drop off. It doesn't feel safe. The other aspect is right up in here. So this green section would have a reduced grade in the more expensive version. And so if you think about Queenstone Fire Road, it's super steep. Like there's sections of this area that are really steep. So we would want to reduce that grade, which would be a realignment and again, rock buttressing to do that. But in the end, if the cheaper option would really just, in my opinion, be building it in the wrong place. And over time, we would just always be trying to band-aid the trail. And the band-aids would never really work because it wasn't built in the best place.
So in the long, I agree with what you're saying, but basically in the long term, if we did go for the slightly cheaper version, we would be spending more money to maintain and to fix, and it would never actually work the way that we wanted it to. So that is why the 1A is preferred.
That's my opinion. Also, we would just end up with a safer trail with the more expensive version. And in my experience, I don't know, the money is not that big of a deal to me personally, because I do, I know, right? Just lap off 100,000, but like I do this type of work.
It's 163,000.
Yeah, whatever. It's nothing. So like I do this type of work, and really the money oftentimes isn't the hardest part. It's like, how are we going to do this? Yeah. Where do we do this? Do we have the land to do this? What's the connection we're trying to make? This connection would be so valuable for the community, right? Like I think we all see that. Like it connects to the Panhandle, connects to the school, connects to the store, connects to Marinwood. Like that would be a tremendous asset and we got a developer that's willing to pay for some of it too. So like whether we find grant funding to augment the other part or just out of the Measure A, pot of money, like, I don't know, to me, the money, like we should just find a way to make it happen and just do it right out of the gate. That's my personal opinion.
Okay, thank you.
I would agree with John, especially I know that there's several options that are presented here, but the reality is there's really only one option that's presented here. And I would have a hard time getting behind anything other than 1A, even at the significantly higher cost. I think you can wipe out all of the 2-foot single track options immediately, because whether you say something is hiking only or not, the reality of the situation is people are going to ride bikes on it, especially given the proximity and who a lot of the users are going to be with the middle school. And we have other trails that are clearly marked for hiking only. And believe me when I tell you, the biking on those trails is a big issue. So you need to eliminate that immediately off the get-go. And my largest concern going into this, especially after that initial walk that John referenced, was this is, to his point, this is going to be a lot of maintenance. This is a tough area to build. And that was why it was great to bring somebody like Tim in, who, trail design is what he does for a living, and he's very good at what he does. And he gave us an incredibly detailed report at it that said, you know what, maybe it's not as foreboding as we thought originally. which was pleasant to see, because I do agree. I think it's a neat trail idea. It's in a neat area. I think option 1A, again, is really the only considerable option, even though we're far from that point. I tried to lay out kind of what I saw as some of the immediate next process steps with the developer has seen this report. I haven't spoken with them since then, but they've been provided a copy of this report. I think that there needs to be some conversations with them that discuss the report, the anticipated cost, what we feel are the financial obligations, and kind of as well as the anticipated timing of their senior center construction. I mean, keeping in mind, it also states very clearly in this that the construction doesn't even start until that roadway has been completed. Well, that project is still in the planning stages because they've made revisions to the plan that was approved 16 years ago. When they get done with the planning stages of that, then they got to go into the permitting stages of it. And as somebody who went through a much smaller scale project, I can tell you right now, going through county planning and going through county building department takes a lot of time. So this isn't something that's going to happen immediately, but I think we get some answers from there, and that can come back to the board for further discussion. I don't know what a reasonable financial obligation is to land on for the developer. I can have my guesses and my thoughts on which directions that they would take it if we, kind of tried to demand too high. But I just think it elicits a very frank and candid conversation on that. And then I think from there, more information comes back to the board on, okay, here's what we know the developer can be obligated towards, here's what the remaining amount would be. And keeping in mind, that's just the trail build. There still are some other factors and cost factors that would come into play. There's still, my belief, the need for a biological resources study, probably a cultural resources study, some grading permits. I think that would need to be done. I think we miss the majority of the regulatory items because we are staying off of the creek and off of the main bank. So with that, Regional Water Quality Control Board isn't really a factor in it. The Army Corps of Engineers isn't really a factor. And these are all other significant bodies that take time to get through some of these processes anytime you're in or near touching a creek. So I do think we could skip all that, but I do think that there are some levels of, I'll just call it CEQA compliance, even though I think that this could possibly be found as CEQA exempt. I think for the district's liability standpoint, you'd have to do a biological and a cultural resources assessment of the proposed pathway as well. And I see John nodding his head, so I'm assuming he would agree with me on that. And then otherwise, I think the only real permitting would probably be your grading permit. And worst case scenario, you might have to go through that, and then rather than a notice of exemption based on those studies, you might have to do what's make a negative declaration or even a mitigated negative declaration. But I have used studies like that to actually support notices of exemption, which would make us exempt from the rest of the CEQA process. You also, as you get into it, if we make it past all those steps, you're still looking at a lot of project management needs. I would tell you, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen when we get to that point, but the bandwidth of the district and district staff just simply isn't there to take this on as a project management, especially when you're looking at coordinating the pre-construction activities, the public outreach, all of the environmental research that needs to be done and so forth. And then ultimately construction coordination and oversight. That's a lot of work. And I can tell you firsthand, it certainly takes away from a lot of the other work that also needs to get accomplished and doesn't go away. So that's also, all of these are consideration factors into the big picture that I just want to make sure are out there for reference. All of that said, I do think the project idea is unique. I think it is exciting. I don't think it's unreasonable, but I don't have my head fully wrapped around the feasibility of it either. So.
All right, so we have some questions. Go ahead, Yvonne. I think you had your hand up first.
I did. So I heard everything you said. And I guess, so does this trail need to be waited to be done until the other construction is done due to the nature of that construction? Or do we have to wait for their whole process to go through? Because a part of what John said, and you've said, that the area has degraded over the years, right? So if we wait even longer, the cost might go up even more.
The
Correct?
exact language is the trails will be constructed during the same time period in which the extension of Marinwood Avenue and the bridge across Miller Creek is being constructed. So that doesn't necessarily, all that's going to happen before they're going to build the building, because they need the roadway to get down
Right.
to where they're going to build the facility itself. But they're building a bridge across the waterway, and then they've got to lay in the whole roadway too.
So this is like 2-3 years out, maybe.
Potentially. I don't have that exact answer for you, Siobhan, but
Okay.
potentially, yes.
But I'm just trying to
Mhm.
get my head wrapped around things.
Mhm.
Okay.
It's a good question.
Thanks, and go ahead.
Bill.
Okay.
Bill was next.
Yeah.
Thank you. First, I wanted to ask John, since he was the project manager on Ponte. And I remember talking to him about when they first initially put the trail in, they had to go through some growth spurts of maybe one winter and then coming in behind it and improving and fixing the trail through the whole thing. So my question to John was, how much time did that involve and how much money did that involve after the initial build?
Well, Ponte is very, that's apples and oranges to this. Ponte was the largest trail project that our district has ever engaged in. So that's a tough comparison.
I'm not trying to compare it.
Yeah.
I'm just asking how much time
this would be done, I would guess, in 6 weeks. If that's what you're getting at.
No, what I was trying to get at is how much time and effort did it take after the initial build? You said it had to go through a period of time, everything settle, especially with the amount of bike riders on that trail. How much work, effort did it include to smooth it out, I guess? You go back the second time after the initial build.
So it really, that's a case by case situation. It really depends on the soils. We were just finishing up a trail at Rush Creek in Novato, and those soils are not great for trail building. So it's going to require a lot more effort to go back and kind of repair because ideally what happens is we build it in the could be the wet months, and we close it to let it quote unquote cure. Right. Although nobody stays off of it, everybody uses it, and then it puts all these tracks and footprints and ruts in it, and then we gotta fix it. I mean,
don't you love the public?
Yeah, I mean that would likely happen here too, right? Like, so I appreciate the question, but it's not a huge issue. It's not a huge concern. It's just kind of standard operating practice. And for our crew to go back and do the work, it's not a big deal because we would contract this out. I'm not sure how the contract would be written. Maybe they do the initial build, they let it cure, and then they have a return visit to smooth it out. But that could be worked out in the contract.
Okay, but also I'm thinking down the road, since we know this isn't going to be built within a year or two. So the initial cost of building on 1A is $274,000. I can't imagine the cost going down, especially given the inflation rate that we're going through right now.
That's probably true.
Oh yeah, and then the developer not wanting to kick in, and then we're going to have to find others. I love the idea of it, but I'm hesitant right now. Going through money-wise, this is going to escalate. This could end up costing double by the time it comes.
Tim's initial number was lower than this, and I questioned him on that, and I was like, "Is that right?" And then he bumped it up a little bit. Like he added in, I think, a 30%, maybe 20% contingency.
Okay.
I would be super surprised. That won't be a doubled number. But you know, when I do this work professionally, I work with our in-house staff to build these. I typically don't contract out, so
Okay.
I mean, would see, but the price would surely go up if we waited 3 years. I mean, there's no doubt about it. That's true for everything.
Yeah. Thank you.
My turn.
Your turn.
My turn. Mine is also, well, mine's a little bit of a request from Luke. Can you tell me just like on, let's do a weekly basis, how long the guys or how many hours the guys tend to the trails? Just so then over time, we can see what we might be adding. I want to make sure that we're not adding to their plate. And if it's an hour, okay. If it's 2 hours, that's kind of where my mind is I want them to, if we still have just 2 of them, this is going to be a big job or not big, but this is something added to their plate.
Yeah, Kathleen, I can speak to that. And we're not going to have 2 staff. I mean, that's not the goal. We'll definitely have a 3rd person. It's just a process of getting someone there. So consider our staff, we'll be at 3 for all intents and purposes. But to John's earlier point, our work on our main trail that we actively maintain is Horn Trail. And to his point, there's definitely more that could be done out there. And we are definitely pressed for time out there and don't get enough time out there as much as we would like. And so we're doing a lot of Band-Aids and responding to hazards, trees coming down, issues where, things are being, bike jumps being built out there, rope swings, things that are hazards or overgrowth that we need to trim back. But so, I mean, we don't spend enough time, but it is seasonal and it depends on what's going on out there and what the issues are. So I don't have like a weekly number. I mean, it just sort of depends on what's going on and what the issues are. It's not a big like regular weekly chunk that I could give you like this is the weekly hours or this is the monthly hours. It's very up and down depending on the season and the use and what the issues are at hand. But the new trail would definitely add to our plate and just in terms of having eyes on it, inspecting it, dealing with whatever comes. So it's hard to say. It kind of would depend on the use, but it would definitely add to the workload to some degree. It's hard to speak to what that would look like.
So right now we're more reactive instead of proactive in maintaining our trails.
Absolutely, yeah.
Would we be more proactive once we get a 3rd person, or was the same thing when we had 3 before the retirement? Okay, thanks, Eric, for your head bobbing.
I would say if anything, we were probably more proactive back when we had 5.
Okay.
And reducing 40% of your staff, these are some of the consequences of doing that.
Is that something else that we should address as well when we're looking at our budget or we're looking at the scale or whatever to see if we're going to add this trail or even other trails on how to maintain them? I mean, I know we're talking about this trail, but we're also bringing up a great point of John's, we can't keep putting Band-Aids on it. We have to make sure that we maintain it, not Band-Aid it.
I think that's to your point, a much deeper question to be discussed than in the scope of this conversation right now. But I would tell you, and I think John would probably agree with me, people that do have that level of expertise and experience come at a much greater price tag as well.
So that wage thing
we
that
would
we're going to
really
talk
be
about?
looking at different things. I mean, when you're talking about somebody, kind of coming in as open space managers and things along those lines, that's a pretty specialized skill set. And, John, I'm sure could speak to this better than I can. But you'd really almost be looking at a separate position than what we have now. And you'd certainly be looking at different pay scales, in my opinion.
I'm just expecting to our liaison to handle it for the Park and Rec now.
Yeah.
I would just add to that, Kathleen, if you don't mind. I mean, I think it's a really neat idea, and I'm not personally pushing back on this from the point of view of like the staff can't handle this right now. I think it would be a challenge, but I think the the benefits, if this ended up being able to happen, would outweigh that particular challenge. I think we'd be able to figure out a way to meet that and figure out what to do staff wise or maintenance wise to handle that. So I'm not personally pushing back and saying that please don't do this from the staffing perspective.
Well, I understand that. Yeah.
But
Sure.
let's be honest, we have 2 to 3 years if this does happen to figure out how we would maintain it.
Well, I think this whole conversation speaks to option 1A, right?
Yeah.
That if we do this, we should, it's like anything else. If you put the money into it ahead of time and you buy the nice thing that's the highest quality, therefore you should hope to do less maintenance on it throughout its lifetime.
Don't
Yeah,
forget,
and I
this
would just
trail
add
is going to be
that-
half a mile long.
I would just add that 1A, like, I'm not seeing that as the Cadillac either. I'm just seeing that as the right way to do it. The other ones are just not the right way to do it.
That's well put, John.
But I asked him to provide different cost options.
You just didn't go for the $1 million trail for us. Sorry.
Well, and I mean, my kind of attitude has always been, especially on things like this, I mean, you get one chance to do it right. And if you miss that opportunity, then you wind up with something that's not done right. And that just winds up becoming a much larger headache in every way, shape, and form down the line. And so it's, you know, my thing is on any investments that we're going to make in capital or in resources or structure or open space or trails, you do it right the first time. Otherwise, what are we doing?
So this discussion was basically for us to see this and to gauge our interests. And I think Lisa's been very silent, but
yeah, so I think at this point, there's a level of support from the board is what I'm hearing. And then I think, Eric, you were going to do a bit more diligence around this from a financing perspective and others, and then come back to us with updates when you have them.
Yeah, I think step one is where we're at in this. I obviously think that there's a lot of interest in doing this. I can speak, you know, for the P&R Commission, and John and Chris and Luke were all in that meeting, that, you know, there's definitely some interest and excitement around this. It feels like the board certainly has some level of interest and excitement to keep learning more about this possibility. I would look at step one that I put in my report is, you know, really our next step immediately is kind of getting some clarifications and conversations with the developer happening on this, so that way we can have more information to kind of bring back, including anticipated timing, where their heads at on in regards to financial obligations, you know, and that conversation could very well get very sticky and tricky in its own right as well. So depending on how hard or strong the district wants to push in one direction or the other on that, could open up all sorts of other, let's just say, doors in terms of you know, what's legally obligated and everything else. So that's, you know, that's tricky water to tread. That said, that's where I think we're at. You're correct. This is mostly an informational item at this point in time. There's no real action to take. The board asked me to put together this study. We had the study put together, and it was ready to be presented. I do thank John for his time, not only in joining us tonight, but he spent a lot of time working with the author of this report, and his knowledge and experience just quite honestly dwarfs any of ours. It's what he does. He's very good at what he does, and he was a tremendous resource to have. So thank you, John, very much for your time in helping with this too.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's the reason why I'm on the commission, to do stuff like this. I'm obviously super excited about it. I mean, this is a legacy project. I can't imagine a scenario where 20 years from now we would ever kick ourselves thinking, why did we put that trail in? Like, I only think good things would come out of it. Eric, I would just add too, and you mentioned kind of project management in the past. I would certainly help a considerable amount. Like, I would take a lot of it on, I think, just because I could do a lot of it, you know, pretty easily, because I do it. So
great.
So I would certainly help a lot with that. So I wouldn't want you to feel overwhelmed about it.
Well, John, you and I have had that conversation offline, and I'm certainly not going to volunteer you, especially in a public meeting setting. But I really appreciate you saying that. So thank you.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, thank you. And
Thank
thank
you,
you for
John.
working with Tim and bringing people that you know and you know how they work on and pushing them to give us real numbers and not idealized numbers. I really, really appreciate it.
Right. Yeah, of course.
Right. Lisa, do you want to go to public comment?
Yes, let's go to public comment.
Sure, 1 second. Stephen.
Yes. First of all, I want to thank John. It's great to have him on the commission. He's the right man in the right place in the right district to make this legacy project happen. Just to give an idea of this project, this is, I think, the only piece missing along Miller Creek all the way up to George Lucas's place. So this little piece of trail is very important. I think, you know, I started the evenings talking about 50 years we're going to be dead. Well, that may be true. And no one may know our names, but they will know this trail. These works that you do for the community are vital and far-reaching and important. Let's not make the perfect the enemy of the good. And unfortunately, a lot of the discussion has been talking about, you know, doing it right and getting the funding and things, quite frankly, that are beyond our capacity right now as a district. Now, I have some experience in building trails, but from a very different perspective. I have built trails as part of the Boy Scouts, working for Massachusetts Audubon Society and the Appalachian Mountain Club up in New Hampshire. I built trails by hand, and so I really am unfamiliar with the way John goes about building trails. He builds good trails. I recognize what is desired on that trail, but I would like to suggest that this trail is so important. We cannot lose this opportunity. We need to build this trail, and we need to build it where with the resources that we have. And so while I agree that we should try to have a really beautiful trail, smoothed out and all sorts of things, we can do a hiking trail quite nice. And if we do it right, it'll still be there. And when we want to drive a tractor through and make everything 5 feet wide, we can do that. I do see that we're going to need to do some construction. There'll be some retaining walls that need to be built. You don't have to build it with boulders. You can build it with logs. That's what we did in New Hampshire. That's what they do in Yosemite. They do this a lot of places. We can build a simple trail to begin with. Once that trail is established, yeah, we're going to have to maintain it, but through use, it's going to become a useful trail. And we will also have the ability to seek out more funding. So we should not put this off. We should make sure it happens right away. I have some more things to say. I don't know if you want me to talk about them. I did talk to a neighbor along the trail. Let's see, her name's Maria, and Chris, you know her. Right at the beginning of the trail, and I talked to her. I was kind of curious what the trail looked like, and it's pretty overgrown there, and she has a lot of concerns about safety, and I did my best to let her know that this would be a wonderful project, and that if you get a lot of traffic along there, it's actually going to reduce the criminal elements that she's now experiencing there. But don't give up on this idea. This idea is a big idea. Don't complicate it, because it doesn't need to be complicated to begin with. We've got virtually a blueprint on how to do it. It's all laid out there for us. And we can do this starting with the simplest of designs and working towards funding and building that more complete design later. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Stephen. All right, so moving on to the recreation and park maintenance activity reports.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, so a lot of exciting things coming down the pike with the recreation department. We completed our spring summer Marinwood review, our catalog of all of our programs and classes and events and the pool season for the basically between March and August. And that's online already and will be coming out in print in the next like week and a half. I think you should get it at your in your mailbox or at your doorstep. And so we're excited about that. I want to thank Carolyn for doing a great job again on our catalog. It looks really good, and we're excited for everything that's going on in that. The staff have been inputting all the camps and swim lessons and programs into our ActiveNet, our online database, so that people will be able to register when the time comes. And we're almost done with all that. So it's been a big, long slog getting everything up and running, but it's going very well, and we're really excited about that. Our summer camps this year are, we're really grateful that we get to return to a much more normal summer camp experience. Our numbers will be much closer to a normal summer, and we're really excited to bring back a lot of our normal activities and our entertainers, and we're bringing back field trips. And so we're excited about that, and it should be a much more normal, exciting Marinwood summer this time around. Registration is going to open up on March 14th for Marinwood residents and on March 17th for everybody else. And we're just getting everything ready for that. And we'll get the word out as much as we can to make sure everyone is informed. But the phone rings pretty much all day, every day for people asking about that. And we have all that info up on our website, and we'll be sending out more info via email and social media really soon so that everyone knows to be ready for that. So the pool season is also returning to a much more normal style season. We're going back to pool memberships and normal pool access. And we're going to be opening up on April 4th to the general public. The Water Devils will be starting the month prior. And we'll be offering, as usual, adult lap swim, recreation swim, and tot pool hours 7 days a week starting in April. We'll also be offering swim lessons and pool party rentals on the weekends. And then our summer will also be pretty standard with our normal programs going on. We did tweak the pool schedule a little bit. Took an opportunity to really analyze all of our offerings, and we tried to make some adjustments to better serve our pool users and make sure we're kind of doing the best job we can to accommodate the demand across the different age groups and different users of the pool. So we're excited to see how that goes this season. And all of that is up on our website and will be coming out in the Marinwood Review as well. Events coming up include the return of Raise a Glass, which we're excited will be happening on March 5th. Got some great wineries and music for that. Our spring art show on April 23rd, and then the return of Music in the Park, which we'll have details to announce in the coming weeks and months. So stay tuned for all that. From the parks maintenance side of things, the staff's, I just want to say a few words about the staff. It's been coming up a lot in this meeting, and it kind of just sparked, I feel like I should say a few things about our wonderful parks maintenance staff. We are down to 2 guys right now. We've had 3 off and on this last year or 2, but it has been hard to hire a 3rd position at the current pay scale, which we'll discuss more at the next meeting and has come up already. I don't want to belabor that, but it has put a lot of extra work on Marco and Estevan. And those 2 gentlemen do work long hours. They're here 40 plus hours every week. They come in super early. They sometimes come in on the weekends. If there's an emergency, they'll come by and check things out. They're just a phone call away, and they're amazing. They care about this place. They consider it their home, and they've been working super hard, just the 2 of them. And one of them's on vacation or out sick. We're down to 1, and that's a big job for one guy to do. I mean, these guys do janitorial, they do irrigation repair, landscaping. I mean, they're operating heavy machinery, excavators, tractors, They know the pool chemistry, they paint the building, they do playground maintenance, construction, concrete, creek restoration. I mean, they basically do everything. And these are just two guys keeping all of our parks and buildings and pool and open space, you know, in repair and keeping everything looking the way it does. And I'm extremely amazed at how much they're able to do with just the two of them. So they do need help. We do need to add to the staff, and even more than that, we need to keep these guys. Their historical knowledge of Marinwood is just unbelievable, and we would be really hurting without their perspective and their experience. So I'm really grateful to have them around, and I definitely want to keep them for what that's worth. But they've been doing a lot of work on getting the pool ready for the pool season. They've been working in the parking lot right now, re-landscaping around, and they'll be restriping and getting things looking better around there. And then along with a bunch of other projects coming up in the coming weeks. But I will leave us there, and let me know if you have any questions on either the rec or the park, please.
Thanks, Luke. Sivan.
I've noticed all the hard work that the guys have been putting in, and it looks really good right there by the parking lot, and all of the wood chips that they've been putting in the area in front of the firehouse. So thank them for all their hard work and long hours. I did have a question about the camps. Are we not going to have girl or boy specific camps for the younger grades this year?
All of our camps this year are co-ed across
All of
the board.
them?
Yes.
And why was that decision made? I'm wondering.
Yeah, I'd probably refer you to talk to Robin more about that, as she's more of our camp expert on that, and help make that decision. But we just looked at where the demand was and what the needs were of our camp going population, and the decision was made to we did change some of the camps around to adjust for some of the demand we've been seeing over the years and some of the feedback we've been getting. And so we did tweak a couple of the camps to accommodate some of the age groups that have had longer wait lists than others, and made a few tweaks to some of the camps that, you know, to make things run a little bit more smoothly and kind of accommodate where we saw the needs were. So I'd be happy to answer more questions about that with you if you want to talk in more detail. But
yeah, no, I was just surprised because I know that there are parents who really appreciate the girl only camps, besides me. And I was just surprised to see that all of them were co-ed this year.
Yeah, no, I'm sure you're not alone. And but yeah, it wasn't, you know, that decision wasn't made willy-nilly, and we definitely put a lot of thought into that. But yeah, I'd be happy to talk to you more about that too, for the detail, probably, you know, talk offline.
Okay.
I mean, are there any other remarkable changes to the camps this summer as opposed to previous summers?
We did isolate a few of the age groups to try to, and we just have, our camps are so in demand, and we did take some of the groups and that used to span 2 or 3 grades and move them to 1. So we have more camps that are just, you know, we have a 4th grade camp, a 5th grade camp, and then a 6, 7. Whereas we did have some that were spanning 4th and 5th or 3rd through 5th. And so that's one change we did make. And then bringing back the field trips this year, we have 3 different age groups going on field trips this year. We have like the 4th graders, the 5th graders, and then the 6th and 7th graders. So that's something that's a little bit different from the previous years. And we did a couple of similar things with the age groups for the younger camps, just seeing where the numbers were and where the demand has been recently, trying to more better accommodate that.
Thanks, Luke.
I think the other thing that worth mentioning on that too is we're going back to the weekly model. I believe instead of last year it was 2-week sessions, and then the year before it was 3-week sessions.
That's right, Eric. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, so we'll be doing 1-week sessions. We have 9 sessions of camp that we're offering this summer.
Yes. Thank you for all the kind words that you said about our maintenance crew. I also want to please thank Robin and for all her hard work. And then also JP has really jumped in to his role and embraced it from last year to this year and just is really gung ho. And I appreciate that as well. And then Carolyn as well.
Yeah, I'll pass it along. Thank you.
Yeah, Carolyn, thank you. Sorry. The last group of camps, is it 7th grade and then 8th grade becomes CITs?
Yeah, we start, kids can start participating in the CIT, this counselor and training program. If they have completed 7th grade, it'll be, if they're entering 8th grade, then
Okay.
that's when they're eligible for that. So yeah, our oldest camp goes into entering 7th grade.
Okay, all right. And thank you for stepping in when Esty was out and you were out there shoveling. I greatly appreciate you stepping in as well.
Happy to do it. Thanks.
Any other comments, questions from the board?
Yeah.
Right.
Maybe just a quick one. Luke, with the whole kind of going back to the beginning of the meeting where I asked about land design, how do I want to say it? Is there a way to expand potentially that contract, whether it's with them or with any other company? I don't know how often that's reviewed, but to include things that might take a little bit more off the guy's plates. I'm thinking about like, other I'll call it basic maintenance type of stuff beyond the, like the walkways that, that kind of radiate out from the park through the neighborhood, things like that. Have them take care of those so that the guys don't even have to deal with it.
Yeah, Chris, that's a great question. And just so you know, we are in the process of working with land design on the contract, and that is kind of a constant, conversation that we have with them. But yeah, they actually do. Land design does take care of the walkways between the different neighborhoods. That is part of their contract. And I will just say this, as far as working with the contractors, it is its own maintenance responsibility of just trying to keep up on them, follow up, and we're dealing with layers of management, and it's tricky. It's one of those things that, yes, we could find contractors to do other aspects of the maintenance, and we do talk about that. And there are things we do bring contractors in for a lot of the tree work. We bring contractors in for some of the pool resurfacing. And there's lots of things we do contract out, but more on a case by case basis as we need to, which tends to be work pretty well. As far as the general regular maintenance, it's hard to get the level of maintenance that our staff can do from a contractor without needing to sort of micromanage them, and that's a constant process. So it's where we're constantly working with them, and so I'm not ruling it out, but that it is a challenge, and it's not apples to apples. You can't just
totally get it. So. Okay, cool. Thank you, Luke. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Any comment from the public?
Yeah, 1 second. Stephen.
Yeah, well, it sounds interesting. A couple things. First about the pool. I'm glad we're back to normal schedule. And it looks like it's going to be affordable again this year for me to swim, and so I'll be seeing you at the pool on a regular basis. Thank you. As far as camps are concerned, I have recommended this in the past. I don't know how much we're doing it, but I would love to see maybe at the CIT level, something called the Open Space Rangers program. And these would be kids that get out in our open space and they build trails, for example. They mountain bike, they hike, they learn basically much of the same skills that you would have in Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts at an advanced age. I think I think it would be very, very popular with kids, and it would be a way that we can get some of our older kids involved in the community, and they could be part of this important legacy project that we're going to build. I did want to mention I don't know how it was decided that it be the Marin or Miller Creek Waterway project. A waterway is a navigable water. It's not a creek. It should be most properly referred to as a Miller Creek Watershed Trail, or maybe simply the Miller Creek Trail. But you wouldn't want to use waterway because that's not what it is. Secondly, some of our activities, I have mentioned this many times, the amount of alcohol use in our parks, I think, has really gotten too extreme. I checked some of our other rec departments, don't seem to have all the alcohol events that we have, and I really do not like to see that in our parks. But I've lost that battle apparently, because you guys want that, and so I'd like to make an alternate suggestion. I think we could make it more enjoyable, kind of like a pub out, say near the Fireman's Pit, and we should build an axe throwing area where guys can throw axes while they're relaxing on a Friday afternoon. Now, if that seems a little dumb and dangerous because you're around a lot of people, it's kind of the point I'm trying to make about alcohol use in our parks. We just have inappropriate amounts of alcohol being consumed in our parks. That's all I have to say at this point, but really, that's it. That's it.
Thank you, Stephen. All right, so moving on to board member items of interest or requests for future agenda items. Any? I have one, doesn't need to be the next meeting. It can be however far down the line. We haven't an update, but just on the cell phone coverage question, that's come up a couple of times. Just a basic update on that in a coming meeting.
Got it.
All right, well, then, if there's nothing else, we'll hear a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Public.
Second.
Or do I need to go to public first?
Yeah,
Okay.
Oh.
Sorry.
that's all right. 1 second.
Thanks, Lisa. We no problem. But I'm glad that we finally caught it last time. Yes, and I do actually have a suggestion. You know, as I hope all of you know, that Thursday night, the Marin County is going to talk about affordable housing in Lucas Valley and Marinwood. I attended the previous meeting, and it was presented that we would be building 542 units of affordable housing. And then I looked on the website as of January 29th, the county has us down for as much as 2,200 units of affordable housing. Now, we only have 2,200 units of market rate housing right now in the district. If you throw in up the Lucas Valley Estates, that's another, I think, 400 or 500. the reason I'm bringing this up is that this will be a drastic change in our community. And I think the board really needs to pay attention to this topic, even though it's not what we do. It will certainly affect how we deliver services and provide to the public. So I would suggest listen and learn at this brief 1-hour meeting on Thursday and discuss it at our next scheduled board meeting. Thanks.
It's a good call, Stephen. Thank you. All right, then. With that,
Motion to adjourn.
motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
Second.
Wait, we had to redo? Just kidding.
All right, so then do we need to vote to adjourn then?
Not technically, you're the board president. You can. just-
Okay, well then I say we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Everybody,
Good
have a good
All right,
night.
Thanks all.
Have
Good
a good
meeting.
night.
Appreciate it.
Night all.
Night.